So, you've read Act 2, scenes 3 to 4 of Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, but you're keen to gain an even more detailed insight into these scenes? Well, you're in the right place. Stay tuned. You're watching Schofield on Shakespeare.
Abbiamo il cuore a strisce, portaci dove vuoi.
Act 2, Scene 3 sees the return of the shady Duke. Last seen in Act 1, Scene 3, expressing curiosity about how Lord Angelo may change given his new powerful position. He has arrived at the prison and asks to be shown and given information about the prisoners. Coincidentally, Juliet goes past, and the provost reveals that the man who got her pregnant has been sentenced to death. The Duke takes the opportunity to speak to Juliet straight away. He wants to know if she is repentant. She is, and whether their sex was consensual. Most certainly. He stays in role as a friar, urging her to turn her thoughts towards God. After he has told her that her partner is due to die the next day, Juliet is horrified. Now for Act 2, Scene 4, and the moment the audience has been waiting for, the return fixture between Isabella and Angelo. But prior to Isabella's arrival on stage, Angelo pours out his feelings. He's been trying to pray to heaven to rid himself of his newly acquired foul desires, but he can't stop thinking about Isabella and her heavenly body. He now no longer values so much his reputation for dignity and sobriety, and reflects on how position and a fine appearance can be foolishly acclaimed. When Isabella enters, Angelo tells her once again that her brother will have to die. However, he seems far less consistent and assured than in Act 2, Scene 2, also stating that he could potentially live as long as themselves. It is clear to the audience that Angelo is tormented and torn by his own desires. He is being genuine when he rails against filthy vices and the evils of producing illegitimate children. However, in continuing to despise these desires, he is despising himself. Angelo soon cannot prevent himself from gauging Isabella's feelings about a theoretical choice between her brother's death and the corruption of her own body. However, much to his frustration and the audience's delight, she repeatedly fails to understand what he is getting at, and even offers to take the risk of adding Angelo's sin to her own account. Thus, Angelo has to be blunt, and when Isabella cottons on, she is horrified. Using extraordinary imagery, she vows that she would prefer to show off whip marks and strip naked following a death sentence rather than yield her body to his nauseating desires. Angelo, unsurprisingly, is displeased and tries to use his rather limited cunning to convince Isabella to relent. Human beings are frail, and thus implicitly we should expect some sliding towards weakness and temptation as inevitable. Additionally, if she argued for Claudio to be let off, by extension she can't object that much to the occasional bit of fornication. Isabella wonders whether Angelo is simply testing her. When she realises he is being deadly earnest, she attempts a spot of blackmail. If he doesn't release her brother immediately, she will spill the beans about his indecent proposal. But Angelo is quick to retort. His reputation is such that no one would believe her. The scene ends with Angelo departing after some dismal threats, and Isabella bewailing her situation in a soliloquy to her audience. We are likely to be sympathetic towards her, but somewhat shaken by her imagery, declaring that if Claudio had 20 heads to be chopped off, he would have them all off, before suggesting that she should pollute her lovely, chaste body. Here are some questions for you to consider. I would recommend pausing the video in a moment to write some detailed paragraphs of your own before continuing the video to consider my ideas. So grab your pen, press pause. The video will resume in 5 seconds time.
Question 1. How do you respond to the Duke in Act 2, Scene 3? Unusually for these videos, I'm going to start with a reference to a production, the 2015 Globe on-screen version of the play. Here, the Duke, played by Dominic Rowan, elects to have fun with his disguise and the audience.
At the beginning of the scene, a screaming woman, presumably a fornicatress and victim of Angelo's city-wide purge, is carried across the stage. The disguised Duke looks a little startled, before sharing a relatively light-hearted shrugging gesture with the audience, which seems to say, "What was that all about?" He regularly draws clumsy token signs of the cross in the air, here following his initial greeting of the provost, and here following his abrupt, breezy revelation that Juliet's partner is going to die the next day, resulting in a laugh from the Globe audience at its callousness. Over-the-top insensitivity is also seen when he suddenly shouts out his question about whether Juliet repents her illicit liaison, resulting in both a startled expression and body language from Juliet and a laugh from the audience. So the overall impression of the Duke in this scene within this production is that he doesn't take many things too seriously. He's rather enjoying his time away from the hassle of power and is having a bit of a laugh disguised as this friar. Juliet may be about to lose a man she dearly loves, but at least in this scene the Duke doesn't seem that bothered or prepared to dish out much sympathy. But of course, as discussed in my video on Act 2, Scene 1, the Globe needs to entertain, and this takes precedence over perfectly faithful character portrayals. But I see no such flippancy within the actual text. Nonetheless, the use of a kind of epinorthosis to introduce uncertainty about the provost's identity, whereas the Duke would have known exactly who the provost was, a random friar might not, does confirm that the Duke may not be as natural an actor as, say, Rosalind in As You Like It. The Duke clearly wants to present himself as a religious man, a devoted friar, as seen in his apparent desire to ascertain whether Juliet is genuinely sorry for sinning in the eyes of the Lord, or whether she is just selfishly regretting the public shaming and consequences of her actions. According to this Duke cum friar, we should repent due to our love of God more than any personal earthly considerations. So the Duke is role-playing, but is there any way we can ascertain whether any personal religious conviction lies beneath his words? In the 2015 Globe production I referenced, the Duke is clearly just presenting a religious exterior in order to further his own agenda. It is a means for him to go undercover, have a bit of a laugh, and discover more about Angelo and the city he has governed so ineffectually for so long. And when the Duke first brings up the idea of a disguise, it seems similarly functional. Does this matter? Particularly to a modern audience who, in all sad likelihood, will be predominantly agnostic or atheist in number. Does it matter that a person without any obvious religious beliefs uses religion to help him gain personal access he otherwise wouldn't have had? Perhaps not. Certainly the Duke is repeating the religious orthodoxy of his time, repetition of which could help Juliet come to terms with her desperate situation. Nonetheless, at the end of this scene, I do have a sense that the Duke has not really given much time or comfort to Juliet in the way a real friar might have done. His utterances are fairly short, and, unwittingly or not, he passes on information to Juliet which only increases her suffering. Namely, that Claudio's time left on planet Earth is even shorter than she had imagined in her worst nightmares. Juliet's obvious pain is seen in her recognition that her lovemaking with Claudio has saved her life. Sentencing pregnant women to death is generally considered bad form, yet has caused harm has been injurious. Just thinking of her love and Claudio brings her comfort, but each time a terrible, horrifying realization that the man she loves is shortly to die, which is affecting her own will to live. So the Duke has trotted off to speak to Claudio, and if we want to put a positive spin on this, as the only man who can potentially put a stop to this nonsense, it's important he finds out the situation and acts quickly. Nonetheless, I do find it difficult to warm to this powerful, unscrupulous snooper, including in this scene, an impression furthered by watching the 1994 David Thacker TV version of the play, in which the Duke insists on his fakely pious, sanctimonious exchange whilst Julia is in considerable discomfort and virtually giving birth.
Question 2. Explore the theme of appearance and reality as presented in Act 2, Scene 4. And note that I have chosen Act 2, Scene 4 rather than the previous scene, which arguably lends itself even better to the question, given the Duke's false appearance as a friar.
But there is so much going on in this scene in relation to deceptive appearances, as summed up with the thrice used present participle seeming. First, in his anguished soliloquy, Angelo reflects on how visual manifestations of high rank, i.e. distinguished clothing, can result in morons being unduly impressed and influenced. The verb wrench highlights Angelo's scornful contempt for such people. To wrench is to pull or draw with a twist, and if interpreted literally, this would be an extremely painful movement if extricated from a human body. However, it is not just fools who are impressed, but those more intelligent folk who might be expected to know better. In general, all kinds of people are taken in by imposing appearances, yet Angelo's realization of the difference between his own proud, aloof appearance and ravaging inner desires has made him scornful of the idea that those in authority should necessarily be revered. How do we know what these kinds of people are really like, himself included? Isabella uses the same verb later in the scene, when she is cottoned on to the fact that Angelo wants to abuse his position and sleep with her. Her repetition and dramatic short sentence for effect show her outrage that Angelo seems so honourable, but yet underneath, his demand has exposed him as a shameless hypocrite. However, Angelo's response and terrifying initial rhetorical question highlights the fact that a long-held respectable appearance and a position of power can be used to mask very different inner realities. Angelo's unblemished name, the fact that he has lived a rigid, highly disciplined life, his own version of events, and the fact that he is currently in charge of Vienna will mean that Isabel's own reputation would be harmed by the accusation. She would figuratively stink as a slanderer. But although Angelo is clearly hell-bent on hiding the truth about his desires from the wider population, I don't get a sense from this scene that this signifies wider corruption and hypocrisy. Up until this utterly unforeseen explosion of inner desires, Angelo has been what he seems. He has been utterly cold and disinterested sexually, hence Lucio's imagery in Act 1, Scene 4. He has been boringly virtuous, as confirmed by Aeschylus in Act 2, Scene 1. But now that Angelo has uncovered a new side to his own humanity, he intends to take full advantage of the appearance that he has built up and believed in over numerous years. Isabella, beware, for Angelo seems hell-bent on moving from one extreme to the other, hence the splendid vow on screen now. So appearance and reputation can be abused, can be used to deceive and attempt to corrupt. In the 2015 Globe on Screen production, Angelo, played excruciatingly by Kurt Eguirwan, even pulls up Isabella's dress in a flash of unleashed desire. Whilst in the 1994 David Thacker TV version, we get a close-up of Angelo's forceful kiss. And why can he get away with this behaviour? Because he is powerful and appears to be the epitome of moral restraint. Yet this scene and subsequent revelations of his treatment of Mariana highlight that this appearance was too good to be true. Shakespeare seems to be saying that all of us have failings of some kind, and it is healthier to acknowledge them. However, there are other moments in this scene in which we may question appearance. For instance, up until this scene, Isabella has seemed to be the model Christian, desperate to become a nun so that she can devote every hour to God, unable to elucidate Christian principles to justify her belief that her brother should be saved. But how does this fit in with images referencing her brother being beheaded not one, not two, but 20 times? Yes, she wants to emphasise the point that her brother is utterly honourable and not prepared to compromise her own and family reputation and prospects of an afterlife in heaven at any cost. But does she really need to be so militant, so ruthlessly dogmatic? Does she really need to use an antithesis to state the situation so starkly? Or perhaps I'm prejudiced by my own gender, and would a female perspective be helpful here? Either way, the New Testament Christianity appears to be fading fast, to be replaced by a more terrifying Old Testament variety. Angelo is clearly the villain, in spite of his appearance. Yet it is also true that this scene exposes a previously unseen side of Isabella's character, which is not especially angelic. Shakespeare is showing us the complexities of our own characters and inner realities. Outward appearances never give the full story.
This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production, imploring you to think in more careful detail about Act 2, Scenes 3 to 4 of Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. Many thanks for watching.